Hello, welcome to the Praying Christian Women podcast. I am Alana here with Jamie. How are you, Jamie?
I'm doing great. How about
Glad
you?
to hear it. Fine. Yeah, we have our kids are both involved in the high school play tonight, so I get to go see them on opening night. It's
Oh,
been
fun.
really busy getting, all the extra rehearsals in. Plus, we've got one who's still doing basketball as well. So it has been a busy week, but things are going well.
Good. Yeah, I can't believe we're this close to Christmas already. This whole semester, thinking in semesters, this whole semester has flown by.
This whole year has gone by fast.
Yeah.
Well, I am excited. We have wrapped up our Proverbs 31 series. Don't feel like you're going to be lost if you started that mid-series or anything, but I am really thankful that we got to go through all of Proverbs 31. In my memory, I don't know that we've spent that long on a single passage before. I know we've talked about different Bible verses. We did a whole series on some of Paul's prayers and things like this, but this feels like the longest we stayed in one part of the Bible.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking that as I was kind of scrolling back and looking. I mean, it was weeks and months that we took to go through, but it was very like all of the topics, all of the verses were just really like I feel like it kind of helped for me just kind of to revisit things that I knew already, but it just reinforced for me a lot of, I don't know, self-love and
Yeah.
acceptance, and also the importance of community and the importance of women helping women, women lifting up women,
Hmm.
and just trying to like start from ground zero with ourselves to promote a culture of women promoting each other and cheering, being cheerleaders for each other. And I think
Yeah,
it's so important for us to remember that because things do feel sometimes, I don't want to call it competitive. I guess it can be
it
in
can
certain
be.
places, you know, the mom world is competitive.
Yep.
The work world as a woman can be competitive. Even the Christian podcast world,
Oh,
you can
yeah.
do comparison, you can do competition feelings, and that's not what it's about. And I've loved our relationships with other Christian podcasters in our space just because I feel like there's so much cross, not promotion, but lifting up, I guess,
Yeah.
cross
Mutual encouragement.
mutual encouragement and lifting up. And so I love that. And I just think, yeah, we need to make sure that that extends to every part of our lives.
For sure. I think it's really important to remember other women aren't the enemy, right? And that's how sometimes we look at it. We'll look at it as, oh, women who feed their kids this kind of food, they're the bad guys. Or, women who allow their kids to watch these movies, they're the bad guys. And it's not. The bad guy is the devil who wants us to be divided. And I think he knows that if woman womanhood could collectively put aside all of the petty arguments, all of the backbiting, all of the insecurities, right? Because a lot of it is just made up in our brain. I might say,
Yes.
"Oh, Jamie's judging me because of this, or that," and I might be convinced of it, and it's like not even on your radar, you know?
Yeah.
And
So go ahead.
I don't even know what I was gonna do, so you jump in.
Oh no, well you just threw me totally off because I'm looking and you're wearing a shirt and it's sort of the right
I
color,
know
but
it's the
it
right
says something about
color.
praying. What do you got there?
This is Pray Hard, Shine Bright. It's going to make it sound like we totally planned this, but we did not. But we do have this for sale in our Christian Books Today store.
That's
It's a
adorable.
bright pink Pray Hard, Shine Bright hoodie at christianbooks.today. But
Okay, yeah, so this is my hummingbird brain at work.
threw you
Squirrel!
off.
I'm in like mid-sentence and I see this because I saw you put on the shirt before you came over, and
Uh-huh,
you
uh-huh.
always put on your
My
special
pink sweater.
sweater, the pink sweater. So I just didn't even register. So those of you that are watching us on YouTube or whatever video you might happen to catch
Uh-huh.
us on, you can see Alana in her really cool hoodie.
I'm gonna gradually like get everybody used to seeing me in something totally different. So like today it's the exact same color, but it's a hoodie, not a sweater. Like
You're gonna
3
frog
weeks
in the
from
frying
now,
pan us.
I really am. Next year I'll be podcasting in like an evening gown or something.
That's right. We'll do this whole transformation over the course. It'll be very planned and strategic each
Uh-huh,
day, just
uh-huh.
a little
One
bit different,
thing
a little bit
changes.
closer to the rhinestone evening gown. Just
That's
one,
right.
one bedazzled at a time.
Right.
That'll be our new tagline. One
Yeah,
bedazzled at a time. Changing
that's
Alana's
perfect.
wardrobe,
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
one
No,
bedazzled at a
that
time.
sounds like a lot of work.
Okay.
It's not.
Well, back to, sorry, I'm going to bring us back because I'm the one that got us off on the tangent. But I'm excited about this topic because some of my two top favorite types of episodes that we
Mm-hmm.
do. Number
Mm-hmm.
one is the self-reflection in a certain category, like learning
Yeah.
style,
Mm-hmm.
motivational style, and how it impacts our prayer lives. Second favorite is prayer lessons from other sources like movies and books. So,
Movies, yeah.
yeah, so
I'm
this one is a
excited
good one.
too. So today we are going to be talking about the movie The Help. It is totally fine if you haven't seen it, although we'll probably be talking about very, very minor spoilers. But so don't feel like you've got to, pause this episode until you watched it. The main goal of the episode is to really show you how you can take anything, even a piece of secular cinematography, and use it as a springboard for prayer. Our brains were not meant and not designed by God to be in deep intercession 24 hours a day. Our bodies were not made to do heavy manual labor 24 hours a day. And throughout human civilization, we have had storytelling and music and stories around the campfire and plays put on. And I think in our society, there can be a lot of guilt about, oh, I just came home from work and I watched, TV for 2 hours. And I want to encourage people to say, yes, use your time, be good stewards of your time. But this idea of, I came home and sat on the couch when I should have been doing this, or that, there could be pride behind that. There could be the pride of, I am never supposed to slow down because I'm Superwoman, right? So I really love these episodes as well. And it's been a very long time since we've done one of these. So do you want to open us up in prayer and we can jump in?
Yeah, let's do it. Before we do that, I have a verse of the day. I know we haven't been doing it
Perfect.
every day. Well, for the Proverbs 31 we did
Those
because
were
we
the
were studying
verses.
Proverbs 31. But I wanted to talk about this verse. This is Ecclesiastes 4:12. It says, "Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of three strands is not quickly broken." And just overall, like as kind of an intro to the movie and the discussion, we're taking kind of prayer lessons, spiritual faith lessons from the movie. And one big takeaway that I came away with was kind of similar to what I was talking about with the Proverbs, just the idea of unity, like when
Hmm.
women stick together or just friends in general, we can do so much. And in the movie, it's a running theme is alone, each one of them was terrified, but
Yeah.
together they absolutely accomplished so much. And I think this is true in prayer too, just lifting each other up, whether it's, where two or more are gathered, there I am among you. There's something extra. Not that our relationship with God can't be independent, but it was never meant to be only independent. It was always meant to be done in community. And
Hmm.
there's so much power in praying together, uplifting each other, cross praying, cross prayer motion. I'm going to come up
Yeah,
with
that's
another
beautiful.
another prayer pun or whatever. But yeah, so I love that. But let's start with a little bit of prayer before we jump into our discussion. God, we just thank you that we don't have to be bound by, I don't know, by a certain small set of activities that constitute spirituality. Lord, you tell us whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whether you work, whether you watch movies or play games or laugh or whatever it is, that we should do it all for the glory of God. And we just pray that this would be a really fun time to discuss this movie and to use this secular movie as a springboard for discussion and insights into our prayer lives. And I just pray that as we do these things, we can be walking in freedom. We can be offering freedom to other people to appreciate all kinds of things that aren't specifically spiritual, to grow their spiritual life, to grow their walk with you, to positively impact their prayer lives. And we just pray that this time would be set apart for you, that it would glorify you, and that you would bless us through it. Amen.
So for a just for fun, I want to spare one spoiler that I think is going to make the movie more enjoyable for people. And even more so if you read the book. I read the book first and then watched the movie, and the book even plays it up more. So if you're good with it, Jamie, I do not think we should spoil what the terrible awful is.
I was going to say that. I was going to say that at the beginning. Like, okay, we're going to have some spoilers, but you can't spoil the terrible
You
awful.
can't. I would encourage people if people have time to read or listen to audiobooks, I would actually say read the book first. It's really, really well written.
I
So,
loved it. I listened to it as an audiobook and
yeah.
it was really good.
So in the spirit of the terrible awful, which you will have to watch or read to find out what it is, our just for fun question is, what is one of your biggest or most funny or embarrassing cooking mistakes?
Oh, this is a good one. This
Oh,
is
good.
yeah, this is very timely because it was at Thanksgiving. So I was in Kenya. It was shortly after I graduated from college. I had been engaged and we did not get married. And it was pretty devastating at the time. It was like
Mm,
I was going to graduate and move to the state he was living in. We were going to get
yeah.
married, start a new life. And then there was just nothing. I moved back home. I just found a job, which I ended up loving. But I had always had, like, before we even broke up, I had had in my mind, there was a guy that came to talk to our Christian fellowship about Africa Inland Mission. And I really wanted to be a part of it, but I was getting married. It wasn't something we were going to do. But once we broke the engagement, I just felt like that door was open. So I worked for almost a year, and my boss, actually, my grant ran out at the same time that this mission trip was going to happen. So I was able to, like, stop work, basically take 2 months leave without pay, and then come back on a new grant afterwards. And I didn't lose my job. So it was very cool.
Perfect.
So I went to Kenya for 2 months and it was wonderful. While I was there, I was there over Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, which I was staying with an American couple that was running this teaching farm. And so they and a few other American expats that were there celebrated Thanksgiving together. So I was tasked with making the pumpkin pie. And honestly, I was kind of cocky. I was like, man, I'm a good cook. I'm a good baker. I bake with my mom all the time. I really in my head was like, I'm gonna blow them away with this
Huh.
pumpkin pie. And so we actually took pumpkins and pureed them, and but she basically left it all up to me to make the pie. To make a long story short, I forgot the sugar.
Oh, yeah.
It looked gorgeous.
Uh-huh.
I made the crust from scratch and I was so
Oh,
proud and everything was beautiful. And you just have to realize that, like, that kind of food is scarce. I mean, you don't have, like, we were eating,
right, right.
like we were
Mm-hmm.
kind of in the bush. We were not in
Yeah.
like Nairobi or something. We were in the Kerio Valley on a teaching farm in the middle of nowhere. We only
Mm-hmm.
shopped every once in a while. We
Oh
ate food off the farm.
no.
So this was a big deal for everyone to sit down. And
Oh
I'm just
no.
picturing everyone's ready to dig into the pumpkin pie. And I was all ready to be proud and excited. And I don't know if I watched other people eat it or if I just tried it myself.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was horrified. And
Mm.
it's not, they took sugar and sprinkled it on it, and it was like, oh, it's fine. It wasn't. It was
It
not
wasn't.
fine. It was
Okay.
not. It was, I mean, you could eat it, but it was not pumpkin pie. And I thought, of all of the Thanksgiving, like, regular things,
Right.
pumpkin pie is kind of the,
It's up
like,
there.
staple. It's up there. And I'm
Yeah.
sure there were people that were
Oh,
waiting all year for this, and I felt awful. That was my
yeah.
terrible awful.
That is a pretty bad, terrible, awful, and it's pie related.
It
I've got a
is.
I've got a funny pie story. Our youth group, this is when I was pregnant with our oldest. Our youth group was doing a dessert auction, and I had a very simple recipe for this really good chocolate ice cream cake. And it's like you get four ingredients. You get a pre-made chocolate crust, like an Oreo crust. You get chocolate ice cream. You get fudge sauce. And you get, I use the big symphony bar, the Hershey symphony bar. So
Yes.
something
Ooh.
chocolatey or toffee. You chop
Hmm.
up the candy, you fold it into the ice cream. You put a layer of fudge between the crust and the ice cream, and then you just scoop it in. So really easy, really basic. But I'm like 8.5 months pregnant at the grocery store, checking out like 2 gallons of chocolate ice cream, three huge, like pounds of candy bars.
I
And
promise it's not all for me.
like, of course it's not. And now, even if it had been for me, I shouldn't have been embarrassed by it. But I
Right?
remember at the time
Exactly.
being very much like, don't think that I'm the stereotypical pregnant woman, which, I'm sure people did, and who cares if they did. But it is a fun recipe. We haven't made it in forever, but it's really simple and
It
easy.
sounds really good.
Yeah. All right. So can you give maybe just a quick recap, or if you want, I can do it. Can you, for people who have no idea what the help is or haven't seen it or read it, just maybe the quick summary so people have a clue of what we're talking about?
Okay. Being concise is not my spiritual gift, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
So, The Help is about it's set in Jackson, Mississippi. And what is the time period?
It's in the
Like
60s.
1960s? Yeah. So, Jim Crow, segregation is really, bad. There, I think they reference Martin Luther King's march at some point during
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
during the movie. But basically, it's about a young, like fresh out of college Southern girl named Skeeter who is not your typical girl. She likes to write, and she gets a job at a local newspaper. She doesn't fit in with her friends who are all settled down, married, didn't even finish college because they got went to go get their MRS at college.
Hmm.
And some of them have kids, and it's just kind of this picture of like the contrast between the affluent white families, and the help comes from, the focus is being on the African American women who are the help. They take care of the kids, they do the housework. And over the course of the story, Skeeter starts asking questions and putting together this book using testimonials, whatever, stories from these women. And the whole story is kind of showing she's kind of the main character, and so is Abilene, which is one of the help, and showing how together they kind of put together this book
Hmm.
against all odds because it's illegal what they're doing. It's, definitely would be frowned upon if it was found out. And so there's a lot of fear involved, but it's really a story about friendship, I think. Friendship among
Hmm.
some of the help, friendship between Aveline and Skeeter, and just between one of the other maids and her employer. I don't know. It's
Hmm.
that kind of, I'm not
Yeah.
great at
No,
synopsis, but
it's
yeah.
really, it shows a lot of the different dynamics between friendships. I think that's one of its real strengths. So, like you said,
Yeah.
friends who are from the same background, friends who have like the employer-employee relationship, the black-white relationship. One of my favorite dynamics was the relationship that Skeeter had with her nanny. And, basically
Constantine,
like
yeah.
they were so close and she was such a part of their family. So yeah, I think the reason the idea came to me, I was watching it with the kids. They hadn't seen it before. And I really thought about Abilene as a great example of somebody that we could talk about because of prayer. So she's one of the black maids, and she's the first person that Skeeter approaches to say, hey, I would love to write a story about what it's like to be a black nanny in the South. And one of the questions she asks is, what's it like raising someone else's kids when you have a kid at home, and all of the dynamics involved in there. Or we see when the babies are young, like they love their nannies, but then they grow up into the kind of people that their moms are, who are very dismissive and things like that. And so Skeeter and Aileen
Some of
start
them,
this.
some of them do, and the one thing that they do show is that Skeeter never really
Mhm.
lost that
Exactly.
dynamic. Like she
Yes.
was the exception to the rule in the story. Anyway,
Yes,
sorry, go
for
ahead.
sure. And so when Skeeter asks Abilene, like it is illegal because it's fomenting civil rights, which like was in the books as against the law, and it was dangerous. It was dangerous for the black women, like it was physically dangerous on a lesser extent. Like it was dangerous for Skeeter just from a social standing. She lost a lot of relationships because of it. And obviously that doesn't compare to the risks that the help were taking, but it was still a sacrifice that she knew that she was walking into. And what I loved about Abilene was she talks about how she writes out her prayers. And I feel like this came out so much better in the book because I think the book is written a lot from Abilene's perspective. I think we get more of Skeeter's point of view in the movie. The book
Hmm.
is a lot more of Abilene, and she talks a lot about her prayer life. And it's been a while since I read the book, so I might be getting details wrong, but it's almost like this stream of consciousness, prayers to God running through her mind. And I think that that is a really encouraging way. I remember there was another book that did this really well, and it's perfect time of year to bring it up. It's the first book by Bodhi Taney in her like Life of Jesus series. And the way she writes Mary, it's biblical fiction, but the way she writes Mary is very similar. Mary, as a young girl, is always just kind of in constant prayer to God. Or if you've watched Fiddler on the Roof, it's how Tevye talks. It's I'm talking to Jamie, and then all of a sudden I'm just chatting out loud to God. And I love having pictures because my prayer life doesn't look very much like that. I love having pictures of these people who can just have these, ongoing conversations with the Lord. And Evelyn reminded me kind of like that. And she writes out her prayers. And so I think that we could also, it's a springboard for discussion about if you have a hard time being focused and mentally just thinking your prayers, writing them out, or sometimes even talking them out can help. I'm very uncomfortable speaking out loud when nobody's around. And so sometimes, like if it's at night and I know I'm not going to fall asleep for a little bit, but I want to be focused in my prayers and my brain just isn't focusing, I'll even like mouth the words to a prayer because I find that for me, are you the kind of person, I know it's so interesting to think about like what your thoughts are. My kids and my husband, their thoughts are sentences and mine definitely aren't. Mine are
Yes.
okay.
Yes. I had this conversation with my kids. A couple of my kids were like, do you actually think like sentences, or do you hear an internal monologue, or do
Right.
you form like actual sentences? And a
Either.
couple of them were like, duh, yeah, well, of course I do. Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
else is
I
thinking?
talk in sentences in my own voice. Like that's what I
Yeah.
do.
Uh-huh.
And for me, I can, like you were saying, to mouth the words or to
Uh,
like formulate the sentences is a way for me to ground my thoughts because of
mm-hmm.
my flutter brain. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my thoughts, it's very freeing also to just sit with God with my crazy thoughts and just be like, you know what that meant.
Exactly.
Is that how you
Exactly.
are too?
So
Yeah.
mine, it's not really language. It's just kind of like sensations, emotions, like, and there are some people who cannot picture a red apple, right? Like if I said, think about a red apple, they wouldn't hold that picture in their brain. I can hold the picture in my brain, but usually it's more about, like I do this with faces. I can't picture your face. Like if you and I aren't talking, I don't think Jamie and have a picture of your face in my head. I have the sensation of what it's like to be with Jamie in my head. So my thoughts are more just kind of the emotions and I love that too. I love sitting with God, just kind of lifting all the random emotions that float in and out of my subconscious. But sometimes it is nice to be more focused. So yeah, mouthing the words to a prayer or like Abeline does, writing out a prayer. If I'm at a doctor's office or someplace and I've forgotten my journal, sometimes I will even just take my like fingers and like pretend that I'm scribbling on my leg. Do you know what I mean? Like writing
Mhm.
things out with an imaginary pen because it can help you stay focused.
Yeah, and there's something the way I think about it as I'm writing things in a journal rather than typing is I feel like it's untangling my thoughts. I feel like
Yes.
it's like I have this spool of thoughts and it's kind of like unraveling those thoughts so I can just look at
Mm-hmm.
each one little by little and examine
Yeah,
it. So I do love it. Um,
absolutely.
and one thing I noticed about Aibileen, because I that when I saw that part and revisited that, when I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking that must be what kind of springboarded
Yes.
you to do this. But she was talking about I write down my prayers for an hour each night. She just sits there and just writes out her thoughts to God.
Mhm.
And she said, so really writing my story is no different. And then
Yeah.
so she told Skeeter, when Skeeter first approached her, she said, okay, she's like interviewing her. And Aibileen says,
Mm.
well, I thought maybe I'd write them down and just read it to you
Mhm.
because writing these stories is like writing the prayers. And what
Yeah.
I loved is she started off reading it. And once she got about a paragraph in, she just starts having like a natural conversation with
Yeah.
Skeeter. And what that reminded me of prayerfully is sometimes I don't know how to get started and I'm just
Yeah.
kind of stuck. And so I'll go to either scripture and pray that to God, or I will
Mhm.
go to a written prayer and start
Yeah.
praying that written prayer. But a lot of times when you begin that way, you kind of spring off of that into like
Mhm.
it helps get you started so that then you feel
Does.
comfortable and you're just talking to God like a conversation.
Exactly.
Not that
Yeah.
you can't continue reading the prayer or you can't write a prayer down or whatever, but
Mhm.
that just reminded
Mhm.
me of times when I have a hard time getting started. And just because you begin with like a rote canned prayer that's been written already or
Mhm.
whatever doesn't mean that's
Mhm.
how you're going to finish that prayer.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I've never really studied the Common Book of Prayer, but I'm really, really curious about it and other kind of liturgies like it, where it's prayers written out. So it'd be like a modern day example might be like a prayer to send your kids off to the school day or a prayer for your visit to the doctor.
Mhm.
And growing up, there was such an emphasis on your personal relationship with Jesus. And that made it feel like nobody else can write a prayer for you. Nobody, and that's true. But in the same way, like Scott and I wrote our own vows, but that's not more or less from the heart as if we had done the traditional vows, right? Like so it's not that one's more or less. So I love the idea if you're really, really stuck, or maybe you want to start prayer journaling and just don't really know, you just can't get it going. Something like I think the two things I would say to start with, maybe start writing out a psalm. I love just recopying scripture and either do that until you're done or do that until kind of your own words take over, or maybe even try that with something like the Book of Common Prayer, where it might be, a prayer for the end of the day and it's written out and scripted, but you can start it and then you either finish it or you turn it into something that's yours. It actually reminds me of another movie. Have you seen Finding Forrester?
Yes. Yeah.
It's about an acclaimed author who is mentoring a teen who has a lot of writer potential. And when the teen has writer's block, the author gives him page one of his own short story. So if I'm mentoring you, I would say, okay, well, here's the first page of a book I wrote. Go ahead and just start by typing out what I wrote. And then like after a couple paragraphs, like you said, the teen's own words kind of took it over. And so yeah, I think that's great. And again, I love these pictures like we have with Aibileen or Tevya and Fiddler on the Roof, of prayer being able to be so conversational. And because I'm not like that. I'm not super chatty. Like when Scott and I drive into town together, we might sit in the car for 4 hours. I'm not constantly like jibber jabbering with him. I'm kind of in my own internal monologue. And so having these fictitious examples of people who just kind of keep this ongoing conversation going with the Lord. I know it kind of does encourage me to be more. There is a time for me to put my prayers into actual language, right? And not that I think what we were talking about, how do you think? And like what do your daydreams look like? Do they look like a movie projection? Do they sound like an audiobook? Is it more like you're talking to yourself, or is it more like, for me it's just kind of feelings and emotions that my brain kind of interprets, but I don't need to put it into words. Think about the way that you think and ask God, okay, what does this tell me about my prayers? What it tells me is that when I go to have like sentence and paragraph prayers, it takes more mental energy than it would for somebody who is always forming words in their mind. So I do need a little bit of extra focus. And I need to also know that it's totally fine. Like my prayers don't always have to be in full sentences, right? Sometimes I'm just sitting with God with these thoughts. And if I'm daydreaming about the next book I want to write, He knows that that's me praying to Him about the next book, even though it doesn't sound like, if you put a microphone in my brain, it wouldn't say, Dear God, please help me with this next book.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And another thing that kind of came out of that for me was she didn't realize she was a writer. And kind of by the end, she comes to realize that she is a writer. And
Mm-hmm.
the hints about that were the way she prayed. Not everybody just thinks to sit there and journal for an hour. In fact, to me, that seems like torture.
Wow.
I like writing and I love writing, but in terms of my prayer style, like sitting there for 1 full hour just writing out something,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't necessarily align with who I am.
Yeah.
And for her, that was her thing. She was very much into like the writing. But what it
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of is for her it was almost the opposite. She reflected that quality about herself in her prayers first and then
Yeah.
realized she was a writer and then went on to write.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of us don't do that first. A lot of us know other things about ourselves before we know what our prayer style is. And
Yeah.
so, like you said, think about like in addition to thinking about what your thought life is like, think about like if you feel stuck in a prayer rut, just think what are the activities that you love doing
Mm-hmm.
and pair those with your prayer life. So, do you love hiking in the outdoors?
Yeah.
Maybe your deepest prayer time will be while you're walking, just connecting with God that way,
Mm-hmm.
while you're hiking
Yeah.
or sculpting or doodling. We've talked about this,
Mm-hmm.
drawing or whatever. Maybe your prayers, if you're artistic, are going to be more like that. Or maybe you're the kind of person who really thrives having a regular prayer partner that you can like bounce prayers back
Yeah.
and forth, or maybe a
Mm-hmm.
whole combination. I am
Yeah.
kind of a combination of all of those things. I'm not just one or the other, and most of us aren't.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It just reminds me to capitalize if you're not happy in your prayer life, if it's not enjoyable, if it's not
Mm-hmm.
bringing you joy, or if you're not looking forward to it, if it feels boring, if it feels forced or like torture to make yourself pray,
Mm-hmm.
pray outside the box using
Yeah.
clues from your things that you love.
Exactly. I love the relationship we see between Aileen and her best friend is Minnie, who's another maid. And they're very, very different, but
Mm-hmm.
they're best friends. Like there is no way Minnie is super, super, super sassy. There's no way that she's going to sit for an hour and write in a book, you know, or even when they get ready to interview with Skeeter. Minnie's the second person that Skeeter interviews. So she's used to abling. She's used to just kind of sitting there and listening and taking notes. And when she goes to interview Minnie, Minnie just sits down, and is like, I don't got all day, what do you want to know? And I think that that's so freeing when we learn that our prayers don't have to look like the way the pastor prays. Our prayers don't have to look the way our moms prayed. We can pray in the way that God designed us. And so, again, I think another just tool that we have is thinking about your daydreams. What does your brain do? Maybe you're the kind of person who always has songs running through your head. That's a pretty good clue that a great way to connect with God is going to be through music, right? So I love that. Or go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, well, with Minnie, when she really got started talking was when she started cooking. Like she
True,
started
you're right.
cooking. and that was
Mm-hmm.
her thing, was cooking. And so she was known for it. And so
Mm-hmm.
once she started cooking, she just started, talking. It just
Yeah.
opened the doors for conversations about all kinds of things naturally.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we could all think about maybe like your parents or your grandparents. Think about, okay, if you want to get mom talking, you do this. If you want to get grandpa talking, you do this, right? And they're going to be very different. With my grandpa, it would have been he took us fishing when we were pretty little. If I wanted to get my mom talking, we talked about this just a couple weeks ago. I'd sit in her room in the morning while she was doing her makeup. So there are so many differences. I love that you brought up Minnie and the food because there was part of it that actually like really spoke to me and touched me. Like God used this movie in a special way for me. So Minnie's story is, or at least part of her story, she's got a long story. I love Minnie. She's the one who commits the terrible, awful, and it's like the funniest thing in any like any movie. But the part of rewatching The Help that really spoke to me is toward the end. So she forms this really beautiful friendship with her white employer, and
Mhm.
they're both kind of misfits. The white woman is not from this like high society. She's from from the trailer park on the wrong side of the tracks.
Called
So
Sugar Ditch.
that's right. So none of the other social, like high society women will even acknowledge her. And it's heartbreaking because she's so cute and
She's
adorable.
adorable.
And Minnie has been kind of blacklisted because she's pretty sassy and things like that. So none of the high society white women will hire her either. And so she starts working for Cecilia is the sugar ditch woman, right? Did I get the
Hmm.
name?
Hmm.
And they form this very, very sweet relationship. And what's adorable about Cecilia is because she didn't grow up in this high society, she doesn't have all of the hoity-toity affections that all the other women in this town do. So like Minnie has to tell her, like, you can't sit and eat lunch with me. It's not right.
Right.
You
She
know?
doesn't know about the rules and the red tape. She
Exactly,
just knows
exactly.
that Minnie's a
Yeah,
person, and
right.
it's very refreshing to see that.
It is. It really, really is. And like I said, I think that Cecilia is just adorable and I love that. But basically, at the end of the movie, one of the things is Cecilia cannot cook. And so Minnie's helping her learn how to keep house for her new husband. And at the very end, Cecilia prepares an entire feast
Mhm.
and she sits Minnie down. And it's you have to be like in the world of this movie to get how impactful it is. But here's this black woman in her maid's uniform being sat down at this huge fancy dining room table
And she
with a
actually thought
feast,
she was going to be like fired
fired.
when she came there
Yeah.
because the husband she thought didn't know and whatever. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I loved it just for that gesture. But what really,
Hmm.
really spoke to me is we have, I think it's Abilene's narration
Hmm.
as it's going down. And she says basically this meal gave Minnie the strength to take her kids and leave her abusive husband and never look back. It was this one gesture. And you and I have talked off the air. I'm in a season where I'm doing a lot more cooking than normal. And I'm also in a season where I've been kind of doing some inner work about like emotional eating and stuff like that. And so I think for me, it was just kind of this perfect culmination of, I think now I realize far more than I ever had before that when you prepare a meal, you do put like there is something, it's not actually tangible, but one day I bet it will be. You put something
Hmm.
tangible into that meal, right? You put your love and your care for someone into that meal. And so seeing I think a year ago, before I started doing all this extra cooking and all this work about emotional eating and what it means, I just sort of said, oh, Minnie saw that she could be treated nicely by somebody. And so that gave her the courage to put her family in a safer situation. What it did for me now, like it showed me like there truly was like the way Abeline puts it, there's something in that meal, right? And so if you're in a season like me where maybe you're a mom and you're doing a lot of cooking and it feels just like, oh, here's one more thing, I would encourage you to think like one of the things I'm doing, and it's going to sound kind of woo woo and maybe weird to people, But what I do is if I like, let's say I've got a pot of stuff that I'm making for the family. I'm in a season where I'm working on being very mindful about my eating. And I'm not saying that means I'm counting calories. That's not what I mean. I mean, I'm trying to not eat on autopilot, right? I'm trying to be slower when I eat. I'm trying to be more grateful about the food that I'm eating and things like that. So when I've got this pot here, this pot simmering in front of me, what I actually do, and I'll do it with my hands, like I make this scooping motion. So I'm scooping something out of my heart and I'm kind of presenting it to this dish, and then I'm scooping what's in the dish and I'm presenting it back to my heart. And the symbolism for me, what this means is I am prayerfully acknowledging that I have prepared a meal for my family that has my love in it. And when I scoop it back, I am acknowledging God has prepared food that have nutrients in it, and I want those nutrients to come and fill me. And so, yeah, maybe, that could be a fun thing to chat about more in a different episode too. But I think about biblically, I think about Elijah, and he had, there's this terrible drought. He's just had this huge spiritual battle. Everybody's out to kill him. And he doesn't know that God has preserved so many more prophets. He feels very alone, very isolated. So he runs to escape the queen, and he gets to this metaphorical valley where he just wants to die, and God gives him food and God gives him sleep. And I think that we can acknowledge like food is more than just keeping our physical body alive so that our souls can do the work of God, right? There is true sustenance. And I do think that certain food can give us spiritual sustenance. And that's what I saw in that scene. The meal that Cecilia prepared for Minnie gave her spiritual sustenance to do the work that she needed to do. So yeah, I would encourage you, like you're cooking for a potluck or you're feeling really rushed. Yesterday we got home and had like 35 minutes before like to make a meal, sit down and eat the meal and get my kid back to basketball practice. So sometimes it feels very, very rushed. But when you're able to pause, even if it's just for like that 10 seconds of not just, dear God, thank you for this food, but truly thinking about what went into this food and what is coming out of the food into you, it can be powerful.
Yeah, it absolutely can. I loved all of that. That was really, that was food for thought, Alana. No,
Oh, I love what you did
you like
there.
what I did there? No, that's very, very cool. I had not thought about things in those terms
Mm,
specifically. And I think for me personally, that it's just, there's a lot of, it just makes me feel grateful for the privilege
yeah.
of providing food for my family, just thinking of it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another facet of that whole scene where Minnie is like receiving that meal from Celia is it's kind of a picture of, well, it is, it's a picture of discipleship. She discipled Celia
Yeah.
in
Mm-hmm.
making food and homemaking.
Yep.
One of my favorite little, I don't know if it's a montage, but just like scenes of her talking about the benefits of Crisco and
Yes, that is
the,
funny.
now you don't do this and you don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And she's
Mm-hmm.
just going through the list. And it's just, it's like she's this wealth of knowledge,
Yeah.
and she is so grateful, I think, for someone who wants to learn from her. Like, I think for her,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
cathartic to have, because when
Yes.
you're just a maid, you're just basically doing all the things. And that's great. If you're good at it, people love having you. But there's something so, I don't know, I think it's a God-given satisfaction in seeing
Yes.
it, in replicating something in
Yeah,
someone by teaching.
for sure.
And maybe that's because I love teaching in general, but discipleship is the same thing. Like, discipleship is a form of, it's teaching. And
Yeah.
we think of discipleship as Christians as kind of replicating a faith worldview, or
Hmm.
I don't, that sounds really too
No,
clinical,
I
but
I get what you're talking about.
making disciples, meaning teaching them what the Bible says, teaching
Yeah.
them what
And
Jesus
focusing
said.
only on the spiritual side
Right,
of their
exactly.
life and growth and development.
Right. But it can be, I mean, there's discipleship in all other, in a lot of different other realms. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was just a neat picture of discipleship. And for her to see the fruit of that discipleship is
hmm
a pretty cool picture
Yeah.
of what that means. Yeah.
I remember I was busy working in my office one evening, and I was busy enough that it probably would have been, in most cases, one of the times that if the kid needed something, if it wasn't pretty emergent, it would be like, okay, we can, let me finish up what I'm doing and, get back to me. But our youngest came in, he and a friend, it was super cute. They were like in the shared Google Doc and they were trying to write a book together. And so my son comes in, he's maybe like 12 at the time. Says, Mom, can you tell me how you write good dialogue? And so I just stopped everything. We spent like 45 minutes. I'm like, I didn't even know I had the entire lecture prepared. I had no idea that was there. But there is something nice about, first, it's nice to be recognized. I remember I was real young and the kids were very little, and I called a friend because I had a cooking question. And she was like touched almost to tears. She's like, this is such an honor to have someone come and ask a question about how do you cook something. And it was like, it was French fries. Like we went to her house once and she made oven fries and she blanched them first. And I didn't know how to do that, but I really liked how they turned out. So, but there is an honor, if I were to come to you and say, Jamie, can you teach me how to? And then I asked you something, that I know you have taken time to learn. So if I came and said, hey, can you teach me how you do the lexicon studies in scripture that you do? Could you just show me step by step how you see a verse and then you want to get to like the Greek language behind it? Like, can you just show me how to do that? It's not just for my benefit, like that's a blessing to you because it is kind of an honor, like when I asked my friend for a cooking question, but for me, whenever I teach something, it helps solidify it in my brain too.
Yeah, it does. And you gain insights sometimes that you didn't have before. I think of when you
Yeah.
taught me how to make kombucha,
Oh,
and
right, right, right.
that was very cool. But yeah, I think that those paying attention to the things that make you light up when someone asks you about them is
Yeah.
a really good way.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I forget what it was. Someone asked me a question. I think it was about something scientific, and it harkened back to my days in
Mm-hmm.
the lab. And I
Yeah.
started talking about it, and it was like, wow, you really like lit up when
Yeah.
you were talking about that, just
Yeah.
what are the things that make you light up when you talk about them,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
when you do them. I think that's just
Yeah.
another kind of clue into kind of how, I don't know, think about how can you incorporate your prayer life into that thing, or how can you maybe share it with somebody in a way
Share
that,
it. Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't even have to be, we can glorify God and worship God by teaching someone how to make kombucha, or by
For
explaining a
sure.
scientific
Yeah.
concept, or like that's just another thing is,
Yeah.
I don't know, just the holistic view of how has God made you, and because he's the one that gave you that love for that, or that desire to do that, or that ability or gifting,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
using it, and therefore either passing it on to someone else,
Yeah.
or exercising your own ability to do it, like that in itself can be a form of prayer and worship.
For sure. Yeah, I remember once, I forget how we got started on it, but I saw you in like science Jamie mode, which I don't see too much. It was when one of my kids asked you a question about genetics
Oh,
and you got the question and you were kind of like me with writing dialogue. It was like in 45 minutes later, they're like, wow, I didn't know all that.
they're
So
asleep on the floor. No, I'm
no,
just
they were
kidding.
really fascinated. And it was fun for me to watch because it was a facet of you that I don't ever really see, because we both have science backgrounds, but we met both after we, left the lab.
That's
And
right.
so, yeah, it's fun. Another question, because I feel like all of this self-exploration, the point of it is then to say, okay, so now I know a little more about how God designed me. What does that tell me about my calling or my prayer burdens or the way I should pray? So I think another good question that you could be asking yourself based on this, what is something that you could teach about for 45 minutes without having to do any prep work? Could you teach someone how to make bread? Could you teach somebody how to begin a quilt? Could you teach somebody how to get the grime off of like that fan in top of your stove, right? What are the things that you could do that for? And then sometimes that might be it, but sometimes there might be something else behind it, right? So let's see. I'm going to take the grime on top of the oven because that's the one that sounds hardest to me. If you're really good at getting the grime out of the top of the oven and you know that you could just teach that to someone really, really well, the next question is, what does this tell you about yourself, about the way God designed you, about your gifting, about your calling, and about the way that you could pray? And so this is a stretch for me because like that grime on our stovetop has never been cleaned. But let's say that that is your gift. I would say, okay, that tells me that you have an eye for like attention and detail, an eye for not doing the bare basics of something. Like for me, it's like, are the dishes done? Okay, cool, I'm going to bed. So it means you've got this very thorough, it means you don't mind the physical exertion, right? And maybe you even find that relaxing, like getting down and scrubbing something. Maybe that actually is a way for you to relieve stress. So maybe that's a good clue. Oh, okay, you're having a really bad day at work or you're really angry with somebody. Instead of stewing being angry at them, go and attack that grime, right? There are all kinds of things that it could teach you. So,
Yeah. No, and I think sometimes we don't take the time for self-exploration because we feel like it's
mm,
selfish
it
or
does
like
sound like it,
it's
yeah.
wasted or but it's
Hmm.
so important because I think it helps us to operate with more intentionality. It helps us to
Yeah.
operate or it just helps us to exist and to I don't know, choose the things that we invest our time in
Hmm.
with a greater I think it glorifies God more
Yeah.
because more than if we're not self-aware because we're not investigating
Hmm.
ourselves to be selfish, it's to
Yeah.
uncover who God created us to be and to
Hmm.
maybe I don't know when you operate in those giftings in those passions there's more joy and I think it's more I don't know more efficient for God's kingdom maybe
Oh, for sure.
you're
Yeah.
working smarter not harder because it doesn't
Hmm.
even feel like work sometimes when you're doing
Exactly.
things for God that
Yeah.
he's already gifted you not that work for God is always just take the path of least resistance. I don't want that to become the mantra, but it
Mm.
doesn't always have to be hard or painful to be good. And I think
Exactly.
the stoic and you know, I don't know, self-flagellating part of Christianity makes us feel like if it's fun, then it's it's cheating.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll answer this for me first, but I'm going to give you the question so you can be thinking about it. It's the same question I'm going to ask all of our listeners. So if you had to just talk off the cuff to somebody 45 minutes about a topic, can't be science because we already covered that. What would it be? So, and then again, what does that tell you about the way that you should be praying? So, I know for me, like I could very easily talk to you about plants. I could, if you said, "Hey, we just moved, we've got this whole room, it's got great light. Can you help me choose what plants to go in it?" I could give you all the everything and not have to prepare a script. And I could tell you, okay, and these you should put over on this side because of this lighting situation and you want to put this one next to here because they require the same type of humidity. Like I could go on and on. And so then my next question, you could, because again, if that was where I end, then it is just kind of self-absorbed. I'm a lady who likes to talk about plants. But then you go and you ask yourself, okay, what does that tell me about how I should be praying or how I can serve the kingdom of God? So I know for me, I pray really well when I'm watering my plants because it's kind of a one at a time thing. I'm walking, I'm moving, and that really helps get my mind focused. I like having something to do with my hands. I like being connected to living things. So that also tells me, like I would not thrive as well in a concrete city where there's not, natural light and trees around and things like that. So those are things that tell me about how I operate best so that I can pray according to the personality God has given me. So what about you?
The first thing that came to mind was podcasting because I had a
Oh
similar
yeah.
experience talking about podcasting with someone. And
Yeah.
it was one of the things where they were asking, is it hard to start a podcast? What do you even have to
Hmm.
do? And I just it was like one of those things where I didn't realize because I consider myself kind of a beginner, even though we've been podcasting for a
Right.
long time. I'm
Uh-huh.
definitely not an expert, but I didn't realize how much I knew, and more than that, how much I loved doing the things that I knew
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And so just not just the mechanics, but the connections with people. So I don't know, I think that kind of harkens back to my like when we talked about the Clifton strengths, that
Mm.
one of my I think my number one was connectedness or
Connected. Yeah.
connected.
Hmm.
And I see that everywhere. It kind of to realize that I love the connected thing, both us doing our
Yeah.
co-podcasting.
Hmm.
If I do individual things, I still feel like I'm connecting to a person on the other side of the
Yeah.
screen
Exactly.
or microphone. Um,
Hmm.
and just the process. I like what it kind of tells me in addition to the connectedness is that I enjoy step by step things that I can kind of do and check off a list and say, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I've create well, and the creativity too. I've
Yeah.
created this and
Hmm.
and then edited this or
Yeah.
put this out or done whatever. So
Hmm.
I think the connectedness definitely enjoying the element of creating
Yeah.
things. And I think what that kind of tells me in terms of my prayer life, in terms of my just relationship with God, is that whatever I'm doing, I need to probably involve people,
Yeah.
which is ironic
Hmm.
because I consider myself an introvert and I definitely gain my energy alone. So I always kind of thought that I was kind of faking it till I made it by interacting with
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
But in reality, I really love and need that connectedness with
Yeah.
people.
Well, and I picture, because I'm the same way as far as people are concerned, but I picture praying by yourself as being an amazing way to connect with people, right? Like if I'm missing my son in college, praying for him is the most supernatural, divine connection that I
Hmm.
can have with him,
Yeah.
right? And he doesn't even necessarily have to know that I'm praying for him, right? And but for me, there is a sense of like when I'm picturing somebody long distance that I'm praying for, there is part of me that is right there next to him. There's a line I love in A Christmas Carol. I used to read the novel to the or the novella to the kids every Christmas. There's a line I love where Dickens basically like he breaks the fourth wall and he says, and he was as close to so and so as I am to you, and I'm standing metaphorically at your shoulder or something along those lines, but there is a sense. So if you're the kind of person who does crave connections with those you love, you can focus when you pray for the ones you love on that connection. For other people, it's going to be something totally different. Like when I worked for our school newspaper, what I loved, the creative process that I loved was starting with a blank document and ending up with like a 16-page spread because I was doing all the formatting for the entire art section. So for me, that tells me I love starting with nothing and creating something that never existed and that wouldn't have existed in this way if it worked for me. And so I look at my prayers as creating things, creating outcomes that would not have come to fruit if I hadn't prayed for them. So there are so many different ways that we can be motivated in our prayers. And my drive is going to be different than your drive. Your drive is going to be different than your husband's drive. And so, again, the more we learn about ourselves, if we then take the next question, say, well, what does this tell me about how I was designed or how I should best pray? We will become really even more unstoppable in the kingdom of God and as prayer warriors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else from the health that you want to circle back to?
I feel like we have to talk about Abilene's affirmations
Oh,
for
right.
May Mobley.
May Mobley, yes.
May Mobley.
So Abilene is taking care of a little toddler, picture a cute little 2-year-old or so. And yeah, they start every day with these beautiful affirmations where the little girl's sitting on Abilene's lap. And what is it? You is smart,
Hmm.
you is
He was
important,
kind.
you is kind, you is important.
Yeah.
And they'll say these things together.
Hmm.
And yeah, tell me your thoughts about how this can impact our prayers or what this can mean for our prayer lives.
I think it's a couple of things. I think on one hand, she kind of gives the backstory later on about her first child that she nannied for. And she
Mhm.
said that she loved him, and it was the first time that she realized that she could oh, I forget how she put it, but basically she could make another person feel good about themselves.
Yeah, and the power of
And
words
the
specifically
power
to
of
do that.
words specifically to do that. And
Yeah.
so, what she saw in May Mobley was that her mother was suffering from what she called the baby blues, but she probably was suffering from postpartum depression, probably some
Mm,
attachment issues with the baby, unfortunately.
yeah.
And she kind of stayed detached, and Aibileen filled in the gaps. And the
Yeah.
mom was very just emotionally distant and disapproving
Mhm.
of the little girl. And what Aibileen saw was that she could come in and she could equip that little girl with
Yeah.
self-worth, with
Yeah.
self-esteem. Like she came in and she basically was like, you is smart, you is kind, you is important.
Hmm.
And over and over she said that. And so I feel like that is, if we look at, Aibileen saw those things in that little
Yeah.
girl,
Hmm.
and God sees those good things in us. I just kind of see that kind of reciprocated as we need to like take biblical affirmations about who God is, who we are as
Hmm.
daughters of God, and we can repeat them. And it doesn't have to be out loud, but there's power in
There
speaking it out
is.
loud, I really think.
Hmm.
And but first we need to know what those things are. What are those
Yeah.
truths? And not just make stuff up, but go to God's word and see, what does he say? What does he say about who
Yeah.
we are? And I just find it very powerful to recite affirmations of scripture or paraphrases of what I know to be true because I know what the Bible says. And
Hmm.
it's spiritual battle.
Yes.
It's literally fighting the fiery darts of the enemy that are coming at us in the
Yeah.
form of negative self-talk, outside
Hmm.
influences, whatever that happens to be. But like affirmations are so important, I think.
Yeah.
So that's the one side of it. What do you
No,
think?
I love that. Well, it reminds me, there was a Mythbusters episode, and they take a fire hose and a flamethrower, and they just like go at each other to see what will happen. I picture what Abeline was doing as being the fire hose. Excuse me.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
Because the mom, even if she's not using the language, the mom is telling the daughter, "You don't matter to me. You're a nuisance. You're not very pretty. You're pretty fat. I'm a little embarrassed about you." And I think every single one of us knows how wounding those words or those messages are. So what Aileen is doing is she is coming with her fire hose and just demolishing those lies and replacing them with truth. And I think we can do that in our prayers too. So let's say you have a kid, because that's the easiest for me to picture, who is struggling with just their self-esteem or this negative self-talk and criticism, and there's, I'm no good, I'm worthless. You can picture your prayers for them as being like the fire hose that silences that. And so I love to think about, sometimes you can picture yourself as abling. So I'm picturing like you're in your prayer closet or wherever you go to intercede for somebody. You know they need encouragement. I would picture myself with that person giving them these affirmations. And
Mm.
so and it would be in that directed. It wouldn't necessarily be, God, please help Jamie to know that you love her. It would be like, I'm picturing myself staring right into your face so that I know you're listening, I know you're looking, and I tell you, you is kind, you is important. And that's really powerful too. And we've talked before about the power of language in our prayers or in just our talking. I think this is really important in how we talk about ourselves, right? Like little May Mobley is not going to look at herself in the mirror the day that Aileen leaves her home and say, I'm stupid, right? She just isn't, because she has learned this new language. So I would say, yeah, and like we talked about a couple episodes ago about how the Proverbs 31 woman would accept a compliment. If you have a really hard time accepting it, practice giving it to more and more and more people. Look at your daughter and tell her, you look so beautiful today. Or, look at a friend and be like, that was such a smart idea. Give them the language that you can't give to yourself. And the more you
Mhm.
practice it, the easier it'll be to eventually give it to yourself too.
Yeah. Wow. I love that imagery of the flamethrower versus the fire hose. That's very cool.
Yeah, and I think we definitely can be doing that in our prayers. Kind of like the verse you brought up. We're extinguishing the fiery darts of the enemy with our prayers, with our affirmations, with our love and encouragement. So I would say, yeah, listener homework. Ask God to bring to mind one person, maybe it's a kid who might need that extra dose of encouragement or affirmation. And I don't even think you need to go out and seek them out and tell them that they're kind and important. I think that you could even picture yourself just speaking those words over them. And that can be a powerful way to intercede for people who need it.
That's so good. Can I end with a funny story?
I would love your funny story.
Okay, so I was writing a letter to some missionaries and I used the Bible verse talking about, extinguishing I wrote a prayer out, including some
Mm.
biblical language, including the fiery darts of the enemy. And thank goodness I reread my emails
Oh
typically before I
yeah.
resend them, before I send them. And I noticed that I don't know if it was autocorrect or if I had accidentally, yeah, it's pretty close to the letter. It said fiery, fiery
Fiery
farts
fart.
of the enemy,
That's wonderful.
but I changed it. So
That would have
that was
been
good.
fun to keep in. My
I
my funny.
really think if I kept, I didn't know them that well, so they may not
Yeah.
have appreciated it when, in the spirit in which it was given, but so I
Right.
changed it. But it's something that I've always laughed about. It's like the what if? What if I had sent that
I
off?
know. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, on that note, we hope and pray that you are encouraged today and that you remember how kind and important and beautiful you are. And we'll talk to you all next time.